My name is Dr. George Kane, and I'm an associate professor in the Division of Justice and Law Administration at Western Connecticut State University in Danbury. Prior to my teaching at Western Connecticut, I was a Connecticut adult probation officer and a judicial branch administrator for almost 12 years. I've also been a police commissioner in the town of Ridgefield for the last 11 years. And I'm proud to say that I'm currently on the board of directors for the Connecticut Network to Abolish the Death Penalty. I have been deeply interested and intrigued by the ongoing debate concerning the death penalty throughout my law enforcement and teaching career. My personal view, one of opposition to the death penalty, may not be a popular view with some of my close colleagues in law enforcement. But I've come to find that I am not alone in my view, and that when the issues are put on the table and critically and honestly evaluated, I've learned that many more in law enforcement share many of the same concerns that I have. Let me start by saying that I'm convinced that the death penalty does not deliver on any of the promises that claim to be the very source of its strength. In my view, death penalty support claims to be a mile wide, but it's clearly only an inch deep. The people who end up suffering the most are the victims' surviving family members who've been promised by many, including those of us in the criminal justice system, that the death penalty will ultimately put an end to their pain and misery and bring them the closure that they've been looking for. We know from those victims' family members who've already come forward and spoken in the past, and we'll hear from some of them today, that the death penalty does not bring closure or put an end to their misery. As law enforcement officers, we have a duty to protect all individuals in our society. And my heart goes out to all of those who've been tragically victimized and made to suffer due to horrible murders that have been committed. We've been guilty of telling victims, surviving family members, that the death penalty will fix them and make them feel better, when the truth is we simply can't deliver on that promise. We want the surviving family victim members here today and those everywhere to know that we care about you and to assure you that we're right here beside you trying to help you through your pain. We're concerned about you and all of those like you who've been victimized again and again by having to go through the pain of the death penalty process that carries on for years and leaves you empty at the end. For those of us who've worked in the criminal justice system, if we're honest with ourselves, one of the many lessons that we've learned is that we're imperfect people working in an imperfect system, and that we're human beings who are trying to do the best job that we can. But because we're not perfect, and because our criminal justice system isn't perfect, the death penalty process, once it starts, carries on for years. We've learned that if we have a death penalty, we can't change that, and we shouldn't change that. There's no parole for an execution. We've made mistakes, and the legal system has to take its time in this imperfect process. We procedurally can't fix that. But we can fix that which we know doesn't work at its very core. And the arguments that the death penalty itself doesn't work have already been made strikingly clear. In the words of former United States Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun, the death penalty experiment has failed. I would be remiss here today if I did not mention another group of individuals whose input on this issue must be sought, analyzed, and considered. My colleagues up and down the lines of law enforcement who put their lives on the line every day to protect all of us from harm. Some of these colleagues of mine would argue that the death penalty is necessary to protect their lives. not so much in their day-to-day activities, but from high-level organized criminal activities. If I believe that that statement were true, we might be having a different conversation here today. But the truth is that many high-level law enforcement officials and researchers have stated that having a death penalty, even for these organized crime offenders, actually places law enforcement officers' lives at greater risk than if the death penalty didn't exist at all. The death penalty may actually be giving us a false sense of security that in reality jeopardizes our safety. Similarly, many high-ranking law enforcement officers have argued that the financial savings we would realize if we abolished the death penalty would provide us with money better spent on far more valuable anti-crime fighting initiatives. Former United States Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall stated over 37 years ago that if people knew the truth about the death penalty, if they knew about racial disparity, the mistakes that are made, and the bias found in who gets selected for a capital trial and to receive a death sentence, and who doesn't. He said that if the American public knew the truth, they would never be able to support the death penalty. Earlier this year, our legislator examined the truths that Justice Marshall wrote about and more. They've seen the evidence, and they made the decision to take his advice, and they voted to abolish the death penalty here in Connecticut. It's already been stated by my predecessor here today. We need to continue that educational campaign and to continue listening to the voice of truth from those who've come to speak their truths here today. I want to end on one final personal note. Just this morning, my 16-year-old daughter, when she found out that I wouldn't be with her today because I was coming here, told me that she had just watched an MSNBC television documentary on someone about to be executed in Indiana. She was troubled by many things that she had seen, she told me, but especially by the fact that many of those interviewed for the documentary were correctional staff who were about to be involved in what was going to take place. She told me that the correctional staff were crying as they were being interviewed, and they didn't know how they were going to be able to participate in that execution. They were traumatized just at the thought, yet they were told that they had a job to do, and they were trying to convince themselves that they needed to get tough to get the job done. My daughter was distraught at this and was struggling to understand how we, because of my involvement in law enforcement, could put our correctional staff through this kind of process. At 16 years old, she was on the verge of being traumatized by this reality. She told me that she understood why I feel the way I do and why I've taken the position that I have. Imagine what these correctional officers will go through when they actually participate in this execution. They're going to be severely traumatized as well. The truths concerning the evil of the death penalty show us how the brutality of what we're trying to do in the name of justice have tremendous detrimental side effects and consequences on so many innocent people. This is yet another reason why we have to stop this cycle of violence. I want to thank you for having me here today, and I want to thank all of you for coming here today and showing your support for abolishing the death penalty.